few people can be called true geniuses of their time, but one such person that can definitely be called that for our generation would be Jim Henson. Henson loved to make people happy, and through his Muppet characters, he did just that for so many people. We lost Jim way too soon back in 1990, but his legacy lives on in those characters, created from his unique design of blending string-based marionettes with hand puppets that, when blended with the talents of Henson, Frank Oz, and others, created some of the most colorful personalities in all of entertainment. Henson, throughout his life, had a love affair with television, and it was in that medium that the Muppets entertained many throughout the years, even after the end of his own lifetime. His creations first appeared on the Washington, D.C.-based Sam and Friends and other shows, and by the 1970s, they had become synonymous with entertainment for all ages. And so, with Muppet Wish Day upon us, TV Trash is going to pay tribute to the most memorable TV programs featuring Henson's iconic characters. So let's get started as we all take a trip back to the street. Sesame Street may not have ever been an actual Jim Henson production, but it was his studio's partnership with the brainchild of Joan Gans Cooney and the Carnegie Foundation that first launched many of his famous characters into the spotlight. Cooney and Carnegie Vice President Lloyd Morissette were looking to do something good with the addictive qualities of television toward helping kids, and thus used an $8 million grant to create the Children's Television Workshop. The result has been more than 40 years of one of the most amazing combinations of education and entertainment ever produced for the small screen. Edutainment, if you will. Think about that. We've talked multiple times on this show about how many times parent groups have forced educational elements on shows primarily meant for entertainment, and how the results were often not good. Sesame Street has always gotten it right by taking a show made primarily for education and figuring out how to make it entertaining, and Henson's Muppets were essential in making that possible. Even though the human characters on the show that include Gordon, Olivia, Maria, Linda, and others have always been instrumental since they're primarily the ones teaching the lessons meant for the show, the Muppet characters have always really been the driving force, and that may be because each one reflected a personality that young viewers could identify with. The naive but impressionable Big Bird, the hyperactive Grover, the hungry, voracious Cookie Monster, and the worrywart Telly. But of course, for many of us that went on to become grumpy critics on the web, there was one such character that just struck a chord with us.
Will you please go away and leave me alone?
You are, without a doubt, the stupidest bird I ever met.
Never change, Oscar. Never change. Of course, if there was one character whose personality just seemed to get creepily more apropos as we got older, it might be Count Von Count. I mean, did the creators of this show know that vampires are obsessive-compulsive by nature and thus were prone to having to count sunflower seeds and the like? We all thought it was just created from a silly pun, but to learn about monster lore at an older age and tie it back to this character? That's freaky! And then there are the characters that have become the biggest source of infamy among the cynicism and innuendo of the online community, Bert and Ernie. For years, this duo was simply viewed as the ultimate pair of vitriolic best buds, constantly getting on each other's nerves. Okay, it was mostly the carefree Ernie annoying the high-maintenance Bert, but were still true blue friends through all of it. But, of course, in more recent years, those of innocence lost have tried to see the relationship as something more, that they were as much just friends as Sailor Uranus and Neptune were cousins. Just about everyone has made fun of it at some point. To his credit, Sesame Workshop president Gary Nell finally tried to settle the issue when he said, "They are not gay, they are not straight, they are puppets. They don't exist below the waist." However, if Sesame Street ever did try to take on a subject like homosexuality, I'd say there's a good chance they could handle it very well, because this show has always seemed to respect the intelligence of its viewers, always believing that kids can handle serious issues better than a lot of people give them credit for. And perhaps nowhere did that become more clear than in 1982, when Will Lee, the man that had portrayed the kindly storekeeper Mr. Hooper, died. This led to the show killing off the character, and doing so in one of the most touching ways possible that could help kids learn about dealing with death. I dare say few media since then have done a better job, and it's why this remains perhaps the most memorable moment in the show's history. That's not to say every storyline created due to real-life events was a downer. In 1988, when Sonia Manzano became pregnant, they had her character of Maria get married to Luis, so that they could have a child like Manzano. A television wedding that didn't include something half-cocked happening, like the groom running off to Vegas? How did this thing ever get past the executives? And then there was one of the biggest ground-shaking moments for the Sesame Street cast that changed the show forever. That being the reveal of Mr. Snuffleupagus. For the longest time, the thing about Snuffleupagus was that only Big Bird ever saw him, so everyone else assumed he was in Big Bird's imagination. Don't ask me about how a creature that's basically descended from a woolly mammoth could go unseen by everyone for so long. Whatever the case, all of Big Bird's attempts to prove Snuffy was real always ended up coming up short. But by the mid-80s, the producers began thinking that this Sisyphean plot device was not sending a good message, essentially saying that it doesn't matter if you're right so long as no one believes you. So they decided the time had finally come to move forward. And thus, in November of 1985, shortly after the release of the Follow That Bird movie, and with the assistance of a certain new character added to the cast, Big Bird was finally able to show everyone just who his friend really was.
At last! Oh, joy, joy! I told you there was a Snuffleupagus, and at last you've seen him, and you gotta believe it, right?
After all this time, and we didn't believe you? That must have been very hard for you.
Well, yeah, it was.
Well, Big Bird, from the bottom of my heart, I want to apologize, because I'm really sorry.
Big Bird was vindicated, Snuffy was welcomed full-time into the Sesame Street family, and kids everywhere learned to always stick to your guns when you know you're telling the truth. The show has evolved in many different ways since then, with new characters being added in the following years, with mixed results, especially Elmo, who has admittedly been a very polarizing character as his presence on the show has increased. More changes are definitely forthcoming as the show looks to adapt with the times. In 2015, Sonia Manzano announced her retirement from the show. Later this year, it was announced the show was entering a new partnership with HBO that would double the episode production, with them first airing on the premium network before then moving to PBS. What does this mean for the future of the show? Only time will tell, but as long as those behind the scenes remain committed to what Cooney and the Carnegie Foundation wanted, the Sesame Street Muppets will hopefully edutain kids for many more years to come.
Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? How to get to Sesame Street?
But the thing about Jim Henson was that he was not someone who believed in stereotypes and adhering strictly to demographics. He firmly believed that his creations could be used to entertain adults as well as kids, and he wouldn't take no for an answer on that. So when American networks originally balked at creating such a show, he traveled across the pond and partnered with Lord Lugrad to prove the Yankees wrong. And thus, in 1976, Americans were finally introduced to the most sensational, inspirational,
Celebrational, motivational, this is what we call the Muppet Show!
At a time when the variety show was pretty much on its last legs, the Muppet Show could be looked upon as its last great hurrah. The sketches put on by the characters could be very creative.
Pigs in space!
Local citizens have reported the sighting of an unidentified flying object. When last seen, it was directly over the Muppet newsroom.
In the Navy, yes, you can sail the seven seas. In the Navy, yes, you can put your mind at ease. In the Navy, come on now, people, make a stand. In the Navy, can't you see we need a hand? In the Navy.
And of course, everyone who was someone wanted to be on the show to perform themselves.
It's me, I'm the same as you, a dreamer who dreams of a dream come true. And all my life I just wanted to meet someone just like you, someone just like you.
But naturally, what drove the show was all of the antics that went on behind the scenes, as showrunner Kermit the Frog was forced to deal with the wacko personalities under his watch. The diva Miss Piggy, the tragically unfunny comedian Fozzie Bear, the suicidally daredevil Gonzo, all while keeping his guest stars happy and looking to maintain his own sanity.
Linda Ronstadt is our guest.
Oh, yes, the girl singer.
Oh, I just can't wait to meet her. She is terrific.
Time for decisive action.
Oh, Linda, I've got some flowers.
It's gonna be a great act, Kermit, but something's wrong with my bike.
Linda.
If I advance the spark.
You know, Kermit, I thought you were the one person on this show who wasn't crazy.
Me not crazy? I hired the others.
And heck, I think quite a few of the guest stars almost went Looney Tunes from the antics of their co-stars for that day.
Bad news, Loretta.
What?
We can't use the Muppet Theater tonight.
Well, what are we going to use then?
Platform 2.
You mean while I'm supposed to be doing my sketches and my songs, there's going to be a dance marathon going on?
Another contestant! What number would you like?
My agents. I don't believe this.
Basically, putting on the Muppet Show fictitiously was only slightly less insane than putting on Saturday Night Live in real life. The theme of the show was a groundbreaking one that just seemed to fit for comedy perfectly. There have been other shows like Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore that had characters working on a TV program and the insanity they dealt with in doing so, but this was one of the first where the plot actually focused on putting the fictitious show and the behind-the-scenes antics in the spotlight. And it's a format that has been duplicated many times since. In fact, a now notorious blog piece by Brian Lynch flat out accused 30 Rock of being an outright ripoff of The Muppet Show. The best part of all may be that this show did not get screwed over by brainless network executives. Jim Henson chose to end the show by his own choice so he could focus on making movies, and he did that with the same success. There have been attempts to try and duplicate the Muppet Show since, both with the Jim Henson Hour and Muppets Tonight, but they just didn't seem to capture what made the original so memorable. Will the new show set to premiere on ABC this month recapture the magic? We'll have to wait and see. And if it doesn't, hey, we know just the two people to make their opinion known about it.
I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't watched it.
Believe what?
I don't know, I wasn't watching.
Even though Henson put an end to the Muppet Show in 1981, he couldn't be kept away from television for too long, and it was his foray into movies that led to his next TV hit. The third Muppets movie, The Muppets Take Manhattan, was an interesting story in its own right, but what stole the show was a throwaway dream sequence from Miss Piggy imagining if she, Kermit, and everyone else had actually all been together as children. Henson received a ton of mail stating how creative and adorable this scene was, and the thing about Jim Henson was he knew when to pounce on a good idea. And thus Henson partnered up with Marvel's animation studio in 1984 to create one of the biggest staples of Saturday morning television in the 1980s. What made Muppet Babies so special was it wasn't just about the novelty of seeing many of our favorite Muppet characters as infants. The story engine was one that allowed for incredible storytelling in a setting that young audiences could identify with. Eternally being kept in the nursery of their caretaker nanny, who I think had a cousin that became secretary for Townsville's mayor, Baby Kermit, Piggy, Fozzie, Ralph, and the others still managed to have the greatest adventures that their imaginations could produce. They were pretty much the same Let's Pretend adventures we all had as kids, which is why so many of us could identify with this show.
This is a job for Super Gonzo. Have no fear, Miss Wayne. Super Gonzo will save you.
Let's build a time machine.
We did it.
That's where I think a lot of the copycats that emerged in the years later failed. They just re-imaged the characters from previous shows as younger versions of themselves and really didn't do much else with the concept. Unless they were doing something ridiculously dated or something. There were some slight changes made to some of the characters, particularly Kermit and Scooter, who admittedly had the least personality on the Muppet Show since they were pretty much the straight men. So here they made Kermit someone who enjoyed action and adventure, and Scooter became a computer geek. Hey, at least he didn't endlessly shill for Tandy computer products or anything. And then, yeah, the show creators decided to give Scooter a twin sister named Skeeter. Yeah, I really didn't get the point of her, particularly since it seemed her main purpose was to be some jerk rival to Piggy. And actually, Piggy often came off as the more likable one. Skeeter often seemed to get some evil pleasure out of torturing Piggy's emotions, like when the group put on a production of Snow White and Skeeter made Piggy play the evil queen instead of the lead. I mean, I think there was meant to be this message about doing the best job possible in whatever role you're given, but Skeeter just seemed to enjoy too much the fact that Kermit got to kiss her and Piggy getting riled up over it. And then there was the time Scooter and Skeeter tried to steal snacks from the kitchen, and Piggy got blamed for it when she was actually the one trying to return the goods. Skeeter's enjoyment of seeing Piggy take the fall was borderline Lucy Van Pelt sociopathic. Still, despite these small bumps, Muppet Babies was charming and brought a lot of us back to a more innocent time, and that was all it needed to last. And it shows in the fact that it remained on CBS Saturday Morning's lineup for 8 years, which is an eternity for a Saturday morning cartoon. Which is more than could be said for...
They're down in the basement, everybody knows. Little Muppet Monsters. They built a crazy gizmo and they're putting on show.
the second season, the creators decided to create a new series called Little Muppet Monsters, which was apparently about these 3 little monster kids that lived in the basement of the Muppets' home and looked to create their own show that only broadcasted to the upstairs, mostly featuring animated versions of Pigs in Space and other Muppet shorts. Long story short there, it was canceled after 3 episodes, supposedly because Marvel was late in producing the animation for the 4th episode in time, so they had to air a 2nd episode of Muppet Babies in its place, and when the viewership shot up for that, they decided to just kill Little Muppet Monsters altogether. It's pretty much become the black sheep of the Muppet library ever since. And sadly, you probably can't expect a DVD release of Muppet Babies anytime soon, largely due to the massive amounts of stock footage that were used for the show. So bootlegs are unfortunately about the only way the next generation is going to see it, outside of Disney putting it back on one of their networks, which I'm not counting on. But still, hopefully the next generations to come can also be shown by the Muppet Babies that your imagination can make all your dreams come true. That's the other thing about Jim Henson's genius, how he was able to send subtle messages about how he thought the world could be a better place. And nowhere may that have been more prevalent than when he broke into the realm of premium cable television to take us all to a place down below where we could all get your cares away, worries for another day, let the music play, down in Fraggle Rock. Fraggle Rock was the reason so many of us who were there for cable TV's infancy always looked forward to whenever HBO offered a free preview of their premium network. Yeah, there was actually a time when the network that would produce Sex and the City actually aired programming that younger ages could watch. The show focuses primarily on a world underneath ours in a series of caves where live a race of creatures called Fraggles. They spend a lot of their time singing and partying, mostly due to the fact that they only have a 1-hour work week. Man, I'd love to have their labor union. While many Fraggles live in these caves, our main cast includes the adventurous Gobo, the daring and athletic Red, the artistic Moki, the absent-minded Wembley, and the neurotic and worrisome Boober. But just as important to the theme of the show were the other creatures that were connected to the Fraggles in one way or another. Living with them in these caves are the Doozers, whose entire lives are centered around building constructions, which the Fraggles always end up eating. I'll get back to that in a minute. At the same time, at one end of the Fraggle caves are a race of large creatures called the Gorgs. The family of Mom, Dad, and Junior Gorg all consider themselves the rulers of the universe, though they really have little more than a farm.
Sometimes it gets lonely, especially if you're the king and queen of the universe, like us.
I mean, I know they say a man's home is his castle, but this may be kind of taking it to an extreme. The Gorgs consider the Fraggles to be pests, mainly because the Fraggles steal their radishes to eat, though Junior wants to capture a Fraggle for a pet.
One of these days I'll get you, Fraggles!
And on the other end of the Fraggle caves lies outer space, a world of giant monsters the Fraggles call silly creatures, including this one known mainly as Doc, and his pet beast Sprocket. Yeah, this world seems kind of familiar. It's in outer space that Gobo's Uncle Matt has ventured out into in order to explore. He sends back information on outer space and the silly creatures through postcards mailed back to Gobo, which Gobo has to retrieve from Doc's workshop and later on reads to learn what else Matt has discovered about this strange other world.
As I watched, the water ritual began. First, the silly creatures gathered around a sacred pole. The creatures then looked up at the sky and held out their hands in a most curious fashion. Then suddenly the creatures transformed their sticks into upside-down bowls. These they've positioned over their heads. At that very moment, water poured from the sky.
Certain types of creatures here that live in the sky.
They swoop and soar and seem altogether as carefree as Fraggles. Then I realized that these wonderful creatures were being held captive. They were trapped on the end of strings.
The connections between Fraggle Rock and both our world and the land of the Gorgs was instrumental in what Jim was trying to say. From the beginning, Henson created Fraggle Rock to be an international show, one that he literally hoped could bring about world peace in subtly showing how all societies around the world depend on one another for survival, whether they know it or not.
Water's disappearing. Yeah, why does it disappear every day?
Why does Daddy take a bath every day?
For example, there's how the Fraggles are always eating the Doozers' constructions. A lot of people who watched the show felt this was cruel of the Fraggles, but the thing was, the Doozers liked that the Fraggles consumed their buildings. Not necessarily because they enjoyed pleasing the Fraggles, but because it simply gave them the ability to keep building more, which is all they want to do. Heck, there was an episode where Moki convinced the others to stop eating the constructions because she thought it wasn't right, and the result was the Doozers almost left Fraggle Rock because they ran out of space to build. In 1987, an animated version aired on NBC Saturday morning. For some, the format didn't seem to quite capture the same magic that the original brought, but for others, hey, it was our only outlet for the Fraggles for those of us that didn't get HBO, so we took what we could get. This was one of the few Jim Henson productions that actually got a true send-off. The show came to a close after 4 years, when Gobo Fraggle finally revealed himself to Doc, who was going through some very personal problems at the time, and inspiring Doc to do something to make his life better. And even though that involved Doc moving to another place far away, he and the Fraggles were able to connect with each other once again. One final example of proving that beyond all doubt,
we are all connected in the great circle of life.
Let the music play. Down in Fraggle Rock. Down in Fraggle Rock.
Down at Fraggle Rock.
Henson hoped that shows like Fraggle Rock could unify the world. Did he succeed? Well, maybe not completely, but in some cases, perhaps he did. More than 40 years after he began this journey, and more than 20 after he left us, Jim Henson's creations remain something that everyone seems to be able to look upon with joy, wonder, and love. Through creative characterization, light-hearted but outlandish comedy, many wonderful musical numbers, and respect for the intelligence of all ages, the Muppets have transcended entertainment for 4 decades in ways that no one else has. As cynical as we can all get at times, we can all fondly remember the happiness that the likes of Big Bird and Oscar, Kermit and Fozzie, or Gobo and his friends brought us. And that may be the best way to honor Jim Henson, because that was what he always wanted. Will a new Muppet show duplicate what Jim himself made? Who knows just yet, but at least you can tip your hat to them for giving it a try. Because in a world that seems to be getting polarized more and more, maybe we need the Muppets yet again to try and bring everyone together, as they once did. Thanks for watching this TV Trash tribute on Muppet Wish Day.